At this age, you don't wake up assuming there will be a next year. You wake up and take inventory. What still works? What hurts? Who's left? And what you carried for too long. There's not much left in my house now. A chair by the window. A kettle that whistles too loud. A few photographs that don't get dusted as often as they should. The quiet is what I notice most. When you're 30, quiet feels peaceful. When you're 90, it feels like something has already ended. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I've had a long life. Longer than most of the people I grew up with. I've seen wars come and go. I've buried friends, a brother, and my wife. I've held my newborn son in hands that didn't tremble back then. But there's one thing I didn't do. One thing I told myself I would get around to. And I didn't. His name was Daniel. He was my younger brother by 5 years. Loud where I was quiet. Quick to laugh. Quicker to argue. He had a way of filling a room without trying. We grew up in a small house with thin walls and a father who believed silence was discipline. Daniel never learned that lesson. He talked back. He questioned things. I didn't. I learned early that keeping your head down made life smoother. When we were boys, he followed me everywhere. I pretended it annoyed me, but truthfully, I liked it. There's something about being looked up to. It makes you feel solid. After school, I went straight to work at the factory. That's what you did in those days. No big dreams. Just steady pay and steady hours. Daniel wanted something different. He talked about starting a small repair shop. Said he didn't want to answer to anyone. I told him it was foolish. Not because I believed it entirely, but because I was afraid. Afraid he'd fail. Afraid he'd prove something I didn't dare try. We were in our late 20s when the argument happened. It wasn't dramatic. No fists. No shattered plates. Just words said in a kitchen that smelled like burnt coffee. He asked to borrow money. Not much. Enough to rent a small space and buy tools. I had savings. I had security. I also had doubt. I told him no. I told him he was irresponsible. That he was chasing something unrealistic. That he needed to grow up. He looked at me in a way I'd never seen before. Not angry. Not even hurt. Just distant. He said, "You think you're being careful. You're just scared." I didn't answer. I let pride do the talking. Pride is very good at that. He left that evening. Packed his things within a month. Moved to another town. Started that repair shop anyway, from what I heard. We didn't speak for years. At first, I told myself it was temporary. Brothers fight. Time smooths things out. There will be a wedding or a funeral, and we'll shake hands and laugh about it. But life filled in the gaps. I married Anna. We had a son. Work demanded more hours. Promotions came slowly, but they came. I told myself I was building something stable, something responsible. Sometimes I'd hear from our mother that Daniel's shop was doing well, that he'd hired a helper, that people trusted him. I never asked for details. It's strange how silence becomes habit. The longer you don't call, the harder it feels to dial. You start imagining the conversation, the awkwardness, the apology that would have to come first. And I didn't want to be the one who apologized. That's the truth. Years passed. Our parents grew older. At our father's funeral, Daniel and I stood on opposite sides of the room. We nodded at each other. That was all. He looked older, of course. Lines around his eyes. Grease under his nails. Still. I almost walked over. Almost. But someone started talking to me about the will. About practical things. And the moment passed. Mom died 3 years later. That time we spoke more than a nod. We talked about her cooking. About the way she hummed while washing dishes. It felt almost normal. As we were leaving the cemetery, he said, "We should sit down sometime. Just the two of us." I said, "Yes, we should." We didn't. There was always something. A busy week. A cold. A reason that sounded reasonable at the time. I told myself there would be more chances. When you're in your 40s and 50s, you believe time is generous. You treat it like a neighbor who will always be home. I retired at 65. Anna had already been gone a year by then. Cancer. Quick and cruel. The house felt different without her voice. My son had moved abroad for work. He called when he could. I didn't blame him. He was building his own life. Retirement was quieter than I expected. One afternoon, I found Daniel's number in an old address book. The pages were yellowed. The ink slightly faded. I held the phone for a long time. I thought about what I would say. I imagined his voice. Would he sound cold? Would he sound tired? Before I could decide, the phone rang. It was his wife. I hadn't known he'd been ill. Heart problems, she said. It happened suddenly. He was gone. There's a sound a room makes when news like that lands. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's the sound of everything continuing exactly as it was, while something inside you stops. I went to the funeral. There were people I didn't recognize. Men who had worked for him. Customers who spoke about how he'd stayed late to fix their cars so they could get to work the next morning. A neighbor who said he'd repaired her fence without charging her. I stood there listening to stories about my brother, told by strangers. I realized they knew him better than I did. On a small table near the entrance, there were photographs. One of him in front of his shop, smiling, proud. The sign above the door had his name on it. He had built the thing I told him was foolish. I went home that evening and sat in my chair by the window. For the first time, I didn't feel angry about the past. I felt something heavier. It wasn't that I'd refused him money. It wasn't even that we'd argued. It was that I had let pride sit in the driver's seat for decades. All those years. All those ordinary Tuesdays and quiet Sundays when I could have picked up the phone. Forgiveness isn't loud. It's not a grand gesture. It's often just a sentence. I was wrong. Or, I miss you. Or even, can we start again? I had rehearsed those sentences in my head more than once. But I waited for the perfect moment. There is no perfect moment. Now, at 90, I understand something I didn't at 30 or 50. You don't run out of time all at once. You run out of chances. The damage wasn't dramatic. We didn't scream for decades. We simply lived separate lives. Separate holidays. Separate memories. My son once asked me why he didn't know his uncle very well. I said, we drifted apart. That's a gentle way to describe a choice. After Daniel died, I visited his grave more than I visited him when he was alive. I talk to him sometimes. Not because I expect an answer, but because the words have to go somewhere. I was scared. I tell the stone, you were right. It doesn't change anything. There are things in life you can repair. Fences, engines, even broken trust, if you start early enough. But once someone is gone, forgiveness becomes a one-sided conversation. What can't be fixed is simple. I will never hear him laugh again. I will never sit across from him at a kitchen table and say, I should have helped you. I will never see what we might have been as old men together. Two brothers complaining about our knees. Remembering stories from a house with thin walls. That future closed quietly. I didn't notice the door shutting. When you're young, you think big mistakes are the ones to watch for. Betrayal, failure, disaster. The truth is, the small delays do more damage. I'll call next week. I'll apologize when things settle down. It's not the right time. Time doesn't settle. It moves. If you're listening to me now, I'm not going to tell you what you must do. I have no authority over your life. I can only tell you what I learned too late. Being right is overrated. Pride keeps you warm for a moment. Then it leaves you alone. I spent years believing that reaching out first would make me smaller. that admitting fear would weaken me. At 90, I can tell you this. Nothing makes a man smaller than stubborn silence. I don't know how many days I have left. My doctor speaks gently now. My son visits when he can. The world outside my window keeps changing in ways I barely understand. But some things remain simple. If there is someone you haven't forgiven, or someone from whom you're waiting for an apology, consider that they might be waiting too. And one day, one of you won't be there to wait anymore. If this story meant something to you, sit with it for a while. You don't need to comment or agree. Just think about the faces that came to mind while I was speaking. At my age, memories are louder than the present. They line up in the evenings when the house is quiet. I see two boys walking down a dirt road. One serious, one laughing. The serious one thinks he's wiser. The laughing one thinks there's always time. Both of them are wrong about something. If I could speak to my younger self, I wouldn't give him advice about money or career. I'd tell him to cross the room at the funeral, to make the call before dinner gets cold, to let the words be clumsy instead of perfect, because perfect words never came. Only silence did. And silence, I've learned, is not neutral. It decides things for you. I'm 90 years old. I've had love. I've had work. I've had years many people never see. But the thing I wish I had done differently is simple. I wish I had forgiven my brother while he was still alive to hear it.